How many did we have in the sanctuary this morning?
58. 58 folks.
I was streaming my daughter's service this morning. There were 107 on Zoom.
Wow.
Yeah. No, it's great.
We had 58 people in the sanctuary this morning, and 57 people on the stream. Last night we had 70 people in the sanctuary, and 36 on the stream.
You know, I wonder if congregations are going to continue to have that option. You know,
Even
after
just
the
for
pandemic.
convenience.
Yeah. So my daughter had been a rabbinic intern at B'nai Jeshurun in New York. They always have a live stream. They always have. And it's great for people who are traveling or they've retired, you know.
Totally. I think Zoom has made a huge difference in this last 18 months. Huge difference. Is this where you're going to be sitting?
Yeah. And I'll take my mask off. We got a couple more minutes.
I want to put this in a place where it's out of the way, but
But working, okay. I feel like what do you have on your watch? Well, you don't have
we have 4 minutes.
yeah, I do too, because that clock is a little bit.
It's about the right time.
I'll leave it to you. So Jonathan, I'll send you those names.
Would you?
Yeah,
Please.
you'll find him extremely helpful, I'm sure.
We're really trying to figure it out. We've been a road association since like '89.
So at least you have that part.
Yeah, that's all done. Bylaws, all of that, everything's done. It's just a matter of
Get the bids and get the assessments, yeah.
and do it the right way instead of throwing good money after bad, like it's been done for decades. So it's
Well,
great.
welcome to Summit County, that's,
Oh, I know.
do you have a headache?
Mostly because of a neck ache. It won't go away.
Oh. About 2 minutes. Is anyone on? Because Joe was going to try. You might have one stream person, which would be my husband.
Person on.
Huh?
We have one person.
It's probably Joe.
Probably. Donna, can you count to 5 without doing anything out of normal? Just
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
is that good?
We're good. Okay. We can get started. We could probably get started. think we could get started. It's 1 o'clock.
You want to introduce? Here you go.
Just a short thing.
Good afternoon, friends who are joining us from home. We know there have been many of you joining us for home for services this high holiday season, and we're excited to have you join us for today's first of 2 Yom Kippur sessions. Donna Shear has been a member for how many years now?
5 or 6, I don't know.
For 5 or 6 years, and as are your children. One child.
One set.
Yeah, one set of children. They come for the holidays often. And Donna is from Nebraska, has a home here in Summit. Recently, very recently, just retired as the director of the University of Nebraska Press. In addition, you used to work at the Jewish Publication Society, which is what led me to ask her several years ago, Donna, would you please share with us some of your wisdom and knowledge about Jewish books? And so today we have her with us, and this is being filmed so we can share this in years to come, and also with our students who are studying for conversion through SOS. And Donna often spends time here with her husband, Joe, as well. So Donna, thank you so very much for speaking with us.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. And I thought I'd spend a minute or two just, well, let me just tell you the seder of the discussion, the order. I want to talk a little bit about how I came to love Jewish books and learn more about them. And then talk a little bit about why you should have a Jewish library. And then go over some of the books. And finally, ask you what you think I've missed. So Rabbi's right. In the early 90s, I was hired at the Jewish Publication Society. I had a very strong Jewish background, but I am not a scholar, and I am not someone who is immersed in the world of Jewish books. But in my years working at JPS, I came to really love and appreciate Jewish books and what goes into writing and editing and producing them. I went on in my career mainly because my husband was transferred all over North America. And then when I was at University of Nebraska Press as director, I had heard that JPS was looking for a partner because it's hard to be an independent publisher financially. And so we entered into a partnership in 2011, so that was 10 years ago, and it's been hugely, hugely mutually beneficial to the two organizations, but it allowed me to immerse myself once again in Jewish books. So that's my background. Again, I did want to just emphasize, I'm not a scholar, I'm not a learned person when it comes to this. I just am someone who came into the world of Jewish books and found a true love. So you might think to yourself, why have a Jewish library, particularly as you're older and you're downsizing. And, first of all, we're the people of the book. That's what we do. Books are integral to Jewish life. And so I think that's one of the most important reasons. And then I think, I often think about Arthur Kurzweil, and I don't know if you remember Arthur. He's actually still alive, but he was the head of Jason Aronson and the Jewish Book Club when I was at JPS. And I went to visit him one time, right after we had published Menachem Malone's 4-volume Jewish Law. And he was congratulating me on it, and he said, this book fits into what I call books as furniture. These are books that you put on your shelf to show that you care about them and that you care about Judaism, but no one's ever going to open it up and read it. And in fact, it was shrink wrapped in volume 1 and 2 and then 3 and 4. And I had an event for Menachem Malone at NYU, and I had opened up the volumes 1 and 2 so he could sign volume 1, and volumes 3 and 4 never got opened. Like, what was that? I was not going to read Jewish law, because it had nothing to do. It's just the idea that it was available to us, and it was available in English. So I think books as furniture is a perfectly okay reason to have Jewish books. And then the third reason is you never know, as I didn't know when I went to work at JPS, that one day my daughter would grow up and become a rabbi, and her first day in her new job, which was a few weeks ago, she called and said, I have an office with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and I don't have enough books, Jewish books, to fill them. So I packed up 3 boxes and sent them to her, because obviously we're at a point in our lives where we can't have all these books. So you never know, a child or a grandchild might become a rabbi, a Jewish educator, and you'll have all these books you can pass on to them. So those are my 3 reasons for a Jewish library. This is a long list, and it's my list. It's my considered opinion. It's not inclusive. You could have 5 times these number of books, or you could have 1/10 of these. But this is kind of what I think are, if you're going to build a Jewish library, where you might want to start. I do want to have a discussion, so if you've got a question or a comment along the way, that'd be great. And at the end, I want to ask you, what do you think I missed? But I will preface it all by saying I did not miss Philip Roth. I excluded Philip Roth. I don't like Philip Roth. This is my list, and so I didn't put him on. I've read most of Philip Roth, and I don't see any reason to have him in my library. I also did not include. I'm sorry. I just don't like him. I've read all of his books, and some are good and some are bad, but I don't like who he is. I didn't like who he was as a person. And I've also excluded Saul Bellow, mainly because most of Saul Bellow's books, he was a great writer who was Jewish, but that doesn't make him a Jewish writer. And having myself slogged through Herzog, I don't need to read any more Bellow. But having said that, these are the books I think you should have. First and foremost, Tanakh. I don't know, I'm speaking to people who are interested in this, so I'm sorry if it's something they would know, but Tanakh, of course, is an acronym for Torah, Writing, and Prophets. So the Torah is just, the 5 books of Moses is just one part of Tanakh. There are, many translations, but this is what JPS is known for. This is what scholars in all Jewish denominations, as well as Christian denominations, use the JPS translation of the Bible. It was 50 years in the making. It's a little outdated now. They've talked about, a more gender-neutral translation. They've talked about a new translation, and that's been talked about. There was a wonderful symposium about 4 years ago in Philadelphia about what would it take for JPS to do a new translation. Well, it would take millions of dollars. So unless you know a benefactor, it's probably not going to happen in our lifetimes. But what sets it apart, of course, is that they were the most brilliant scholars who worked on the translation, and it's from the oldest Masoretic text. But it's still a translation, and translations are open to, interpretation. So I do think of the Everett Fox and the Robert Alter translations, which are both just the 5 books of Moses. They haven't done the whole Tanakh. I think they're worth looking at. I put the Oxford Jewish Study Bible down because it uses a JPS translation, but it's a good commentary. It's a very scholarly work as well. I might stop there because, Rabbi, if you have anything to add to the Tanakh. Okay. I put Rashi's commentary on the Bible. I don't think anybody's actually going to read it, but again, if you want a little padding in your furniture, that's a good one. I put the Legends of the Bible, and so Louis Ginsberg had done the 7-volume Legends of the Jews, which later got put into 2 fat volumes of Legends of the Jews. But if you just want a 1-volume paperback that condenses it, it's a really excellent anthology of Legends of the Bible. I, of course, am very partial to the JPS Torah commentaries and other Bible commentaries. Again, how often you would you would want them or whatever. So perhaps it's enough just to have Eitz Chaim, which is the conservative Chumash, which uses, it's sort of a condensed version. But I'm sure, Rabbi, you probably consult the JPS Torah commentaries quite often. And I had the greatest pleasure. So the first 4 books of the JPS Torah commentaries all came out on time. And then Jeff Tigay was doing Deuteronomy, and he knew it was his life's work, and he couldn't let go of it. And so we finally wrested it from him and published it, and were able then to sell the entire 5 volumes. I mean, like, I don't know, 10 years had gone by. But I was visiting with the general editor of the Anchor Bible series one time, and he said, Donna, that's nothing. We've been waiting 30 years for some of ours. But I had the pleasure of then being able to work on the entire commentary. And various JPS commentaries on other parts of the Bible come out from time to time. Esther is out, and there's a commentary on the Haftorah by Michael Fishbane. There's a whole range of them that come out. We're about to publish the first of 5 volumes of the Psalms, which is Ben Summer. So it's going to be pretty fantastic. You probably don't want to own the 22 volumes of Adin Steinsaltz's Talmud, but he does have a book called The Essential Talmud. So again, if you want to get into in more depth as you do Jewish learning, those are books you want to have. I had the pleasure while I was at JPS of publishing Aviva Zornberg, and recently when I was in Israel, I actually had the pleasure of going to hear one of her speeches. We published it. It was then called Genesis, the Beginning of Desire, but Random House published the paperback and switched the title and subtitle. And she does have Exodus out also. I don't think she's done anything since. There's not much to. She gives a very literary. She's a brilliant woman, and she gives a very literary. She does a lot of literary interpretations of the Bible, and I think if you're ever looking for inspiration or a different way to look at things, because she's so grounded in Judaism. Her father was the chief rabbi of Scotland. She's grounded in Judaism, but also in literature. I would recommend. So I highly recommend it. Of course, Nahama Leibowitz, probably the most famous female Bible commentator. So you can get studies in the weekly portion. I mentioned that I have probably a dozen or more Sidurim. If you're old enough and your synagogue keeps buying new ones, then you end up with old ones. But also I have a couple of Orthodox ones, and I have many conservative and Reform. And even today you can understand with a Sidurim or Machzorim the different things that come to it. So you don't just have the liturgy, you have the extra readings. I mean, Leonard Cohen, that's not going to be in an Orthodox or a conservative even probably. Things change, and there's gender-neutral language now and new interpretations. So I recommend a wide range of them, of the both Sidurim and the Machzors. And then I have the same idea. I have about 2 or 3 Chumashim. Is that the way to say it, Chumashim? I love Eitz Chaim. I worked on Eitz Chaim, and I think it's, it finally came to fruition. But there's a new revised Plaut. I do have a funny story. I'll tell you some. So I was when I worked at JPS, I was at a convention. I don't remember which one it was, but I was in our booth, and this man came in, and he said, I've been published by every major Jewish publisher except JPS. And I said, well, JPS, we have very high standards, and we're, it's really hard, it's very competitive. And then when he was leaving, I said, and what is your name? And he said, I'm going to flout. I was like, oh, well, That was embarrassing. But, there is a new revised Plaut, and there's also from the Reform movement a women's commentary on the Bible, which I would recommend because you're going to hear voices that you didn't even know existed in the Bible. I cannot remember if they use the JPS translation in that. I think they do. There's a great one-volume introduction to all of this by Barry Holtz called Back to the Sources, and that may just be the best place to begin. I put the Zohar down. I have 2 or 3 of them. I can't understand it, so... There's, I think, the Essential Zohar as well. But, if you really want that book says furniture, Stanford University Press publishes the Daniel Matt, and I don't know if they're 7 or 8 or 9 volumes now. You could buy them and put them on your shelf, but you're probably never going to read them. In terms of history, it's interesting. There's really not one good book of Jewish history. In fact, it's kind of sad. So I've listed a few. If you saw the Simon Schama NPR special, I don't know how many years ago it was, on the history of the Jews, it's been turned into a book. I think it was probably one of the better ones, and it's obviously highly abridged for the book. I'm just picking out a few, and then Jonathan Sarna's book on American Judaism is very good. I'm sorry. Yeah, that's a great book by, wait for the mic because we're streaming.
Hey, my name's Mark Wachowski. Hi,
Right.
everybody. Yeah, I was just commenting the first book on the list in history, Jerusalem. I've got that book, and I plowed through it. It's a challenging read, but the information is incredibly interesting. So.
Yeah, and I think he won some major awards with that book. So yeah, I recommend it. But again, it's about Jerusalem, and that's only a small part. And there are some fiction that we'll get to later that will also give you some insight. But there's just no really good book on the history of the Jews. Would you agree, Rabbi? Or
I don't think there is. I actually do like the atlas that was done, the Atlas of the Jewish People.
right.
Because that covers also, I think, from all over the world, Iran, Iraq, India, China. This list
Yeah.
also, it just is a little Ashkenazi, I think, centered.
Yeah, I would agree. And we distributed that book. We didn't
Barnavi, I
produce it.
think it was. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. I should have probably put that one on there. And I wanted just to mention about Holocaust literature because I've probably in my lifetime read, I don't know, 36 Holocaust memoirs. I mean, they're all gut-wrenching, but they're all flawed in many ways. One of them, which is what people remember in the time and how they remember things. You should have a whole range of them in your library, but I leave it to you to decide which ones are the ones that you think are the most compelling. And last night I woke up in the middle of the night and thought I didn't put Primo Levi on the list, and that's an omission that I should go back to. So I would recommend, having a few and reading a few, but the ones you pick are, I don't know, do you have a specific one or two, Rabbi, that you... Yeah, memoirs or
Painted Bird, was that one? The Painted Bird?
so I don't know that. Oh, somebody behind you.
I think one of the things you omitted was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. And I don't know if it's
Yeah.
history or if it's other text, because it was certainly Holocaust era.
I thought about that last night too, yeah.
Yeah.
Philosophy or something.
Yeah. Okay, so when I was setting up a Jewish household, Blue Greenberg's book was really, really helpful for me. So it's probably a little outdated now, but How to Run a Traditional Jewish Household she's very clear and very pragmatic. Obviously, Abraham Joshua Heschel, The Sabbath. And then Celebrating the Jewish Year, the Steinberg 3-volume set. I'm sure for your conversion students, you probably use the Donin. I mean, that's a great one. JPS just reissued Arthur Waskell's Seasons of Our Joy, which is another great. It's 4 volumes. It's in the 4 seasons, and he talks about each holiday. I asked my daughter to look over the list, and she recommended this book by Sarah Hurwitz, Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism. I haven't read it. She was the speechwriter for Hillary Clinton. It did get a lot of press. I haven't read that book. Any others that anyone can think about for home practice and holidays?
That I use.
You have to speak into the mic, Margaret.
A microphone. Oh, sorry. I was given a book when I converted called On the Doorposts of Your House, which I know has been done again. It's CCR Press.
Uh-huh.
But it has a lot of prayers and different things that you can incorporate into whatever's happening in your life. Someone's graduating, there's a baby being born, there's a death, there's a shiva, it covers everything, and I use it a lot.
Okay.
And I've given
And it's
it as
not
a
one
gift.
I know, yeah.
My rabbi gave it to me. So that I like that one very much.
Rabbi?
The High Holiday book that I've been giving to people in the last 5 years is Alan Lew's This Is Real and You're Completely Unprepared for It. And it's actually begins during the Slichot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, but it's kind of a contemporary theological approach to how to make meanings of this time of year. And I'd say most people have really, really liked it.
And can you say it again?
This is real and you're completely unprepared. The days of awe.
Great.
Susan Knopf, we also use On the Doorposts of your house. Yeah.
So we should probably add those to the list. And then Mark has a comment.
Hi, this is Mark again. I wanted to just take us back to the history section very quick.
Sure,
and I just
sure.
wanted to ask if you or anybody else has read the Herman Wouk books, The Hope and the Glory, 2 volumes. It's great. It's history, of course, and it starts from the War of Independence through the Six-Day War. And it's quite a good history. So when you were saying, does anybody know good books on history of the Jews, if you think about the entire Jewish thing from the beginning to now, that's a pretty extensive history. It's hard to get all that in one book.
Yeah.
But sometimes particularly,
So this
eras
is a history
are
of Israel?
particularly interesting. Another very good book is, I forget the exact title, but it's something like 13 Days, and it's the 13 Days in Camp David. And it's what Jimmy Carter did in shuttle diplomacy between all the players. A very, very interesting read, because it's blow by blow, day by day. So anyway.
And there are a number, of books like that that, for particular periods of time in history or particular, history of Israel. I have it on the list, but I didn't mention The Zionist Idea and by Arthur Hertzberg, which is an anthology. And then recently Gil Troy did an updated one called The Zionist Ideas. I would recommend those. They have their anthologies are edited volumes. So yeah, thanks for adding that. In terms of fiction, there's a lot. There are both a lot of books that have Jewish themes, and there are a lot of books that are by Jewish authors. I mean, probably we all know Chaim Potok's books. I think all of them are fantastic. I mean, if you're only going to read one, I guess The Chosen, but I love them all. And I must say, one of the highlights of my career at JPS was being able to work with Chaim a few times, because a lot of people don't know, but he was one of the editors on the JPS Torah commentaries. I forget if he was called the literary editor. Obviously, Chaim Potak's a wonderful novelist. Exodus by Leon Uris has, maybe not aged well, but it's probably a good book to have. Night, of course, by Elie Wiesel, whether you consider it Holocaust or fiction or whatever, I mean, that's probably one of the cornerstones of literature. As I mentioned, I left Primo Levi off. I.B. Singer. And then, of course, I think it's crucial to read As a Driven Leaf, and that will also give you a sense of the beginning of rabbinic Judaism, because it takes place, it's fiction, but it takes place in when the temple's destroyed, and then the Jews want the temple rebuilt in Rome. So, in Jerusalem. So I think it's a good book to read. It's fiction, but it's a good background about rabbinic Judaism. Various books by Amos Oz, the poetry of Yehuda Amichai. I don't know, you probably have a ton, and when we finish, maybe we'll finish the discussion and then go back and open it up, because I'm sure you have a ton of books in this category that you would include. Same with children's books. I heard somebody mention PJ Library. All of my grandchildren get the PJ Library books, and it's wonderful. It's an absolutely wonderful service. It's free, and they're great books, but they're mostly books that are being commissioned. One book I left off of here that JPS published is I can't remember the name of it. It's the Holocaust. What is it called? It'll come to me, but it's got the bunnies. It's a little children's book. Why can I not remember it? Terrible Things. It's called Terrible Things, and it's a great allegory about the Holocaust for really young children. And it's a little paperback. It costs like $7. I probably raised the price from $5. So I recommend that too. Number of the Stars is my favorite kind of young reader book, because it doesn't get into the sort of cruelty. It doesn't get into the nitty-gritty of the Holocaust. It's about Denmark and the. Anyway, I recommend that for you if you have young grandchildren. If they're reading, I think 8 or 9 years old. Do you remember the All of a Kind Family by Sidney Taylor? Oh, Rabbi. They may be out of print, but you must read those books, because they're just about a Jewish family, and it's a series of paperback books. I love The Adventures of Ketantan, the Jewish Tom Thumb. Again, those were just reissued by JPS a few years ago. And there are many Jewish children's Bibles, and I would just caution to make sure you're actually getting a Jewish children's Bible and not just a children's Bible if you're going to buy them for children or grandchildren. And then if you have kids who are into sports, there are so many good young adult biographies of Jewish sports figures, whether it's Sandy Koufax or Mo Berg. There's some good ones out there. And then I have to say that Harold Kushner's book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People, I think should be on everybody's bookshelf, whether you're Jewish or not. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I often give it to people who are struggling with why this bad thing happened to them. And so I recommend that. Did you? Yeah. I also had the pleasure of working with Harold Kushner, because he was also involved with JPS. So that's why it was such a phenomenal time in my life to be able to meet these people and help them sell their books and market them and distribute them and figure out the best way to present them. So a really wonderful person, Harold Kushner. I don't think he's still practicing, is he? He's emeritus in Boston. I put a few other ones down there, and then I specifically wanted to mention Haggadah and history, which doesn't really fit anywhere. It's the history of the Haggadah, and it's a gorgeous, gorgeous book by Yerushalmi. And it's got gatefolds, and it's just a gorgeous book. It was actually nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. I think it was published in the 60s originally. And I think if you want the original editions, because the newer editions are not as nicely produced, you have to go to a rare bookstore. They have editions of them. I think both as a book as furniture, but also to learn something about the history of the Haggadah, it's quite useful. That does remind me that I skipped over Haggadot, and I would just say to people, we've used a lot of them over the years.
Because it's just great.
Yeah.
I've used that for a long time now.
Yeah, I mean, for years we used the RA, that big one with the funny cutout pictures, and then, I don't know, we've just used a whole bunch of different ones. And then last year we tried to just download one. That was a disaster. Mark again.
Similar to you, in running seders and that sort of thing at the house and inviting all sorts of different people over the years, I've always looked for a creative way to approach it. And I discovered a few years ago, I didn't use it this past year, but I discovered a few years ago a really cool one, and it's by Elie Wiesel.
Oh,
and
really?
He wrote a very pretty modern, I think it came out in the last, 5, 6, 7 years, something like that, but a fairly modern rendition of the whole story. So
Wow, I didn't know that.
that was really interesting, I
Yeah.
thought.
Much like everyone else, we have like a billion copies of the same Haggadah. And one of the things that I would encourage everyone to do with their Haggadot is before you sit down and start your Seder, have everyone write their name and the year in the Haggadah.
Oh,
Like what we wouldn't give to have 40 years instead of 20 years of history. And then my brother and I split up the Haggadahs because they're downsizing. And I went through all of them, and he got the rookie ones. And I, as the maker of Pesach, decided to keep the good ones. Or the well-signed ones, I should say.
yeah. When I was growing up, it was the Maxwell House, you know. And Joe, if he's on the streaming, my grandfather of blessed memory did the Seder in Yiddish. So not only was it horrible, it was beyond horrible. I mean, we didn't know what was going on. Yeah. We've come a long way with Haggadot, that's for sure. And there's something for everybody, and I would just recommend. Susan.
We use a children's Haggadah. It's illustrated. It's quick. And it's worked really well. And my kids made fun of it forever and ever. And then they all wanted the copies I had so they could have them at their own house.
Yeah,
and none of them have children. Well, now they do, but they didn't when they asked for them.
We used one when my kids were little that had the frogs jumping, and I don't remember what it was called. And yeah, I mean, you know, the purpose of telling this story of the Passover story at Seder is for the children. So if you're using a children's Haggadah because that's what works for your family, that's all the more reason to do it. So that's my list. You all have mentioned some good books, but yeah, I just wanted to open it up to what you thought should be on there. I see a couple, but Margaret's already got the mic, so we'll start with her.
While you're on the Haggadah, a number of years ago, quite a number of years ago, there was someone had something online to create your own Haggadah. And it was a wonderful program. And you could put your family photos in it, and you could pick out how you wanted it, the prayers to be read. Did you want the conservative version? Did you want the Orthodox version? You created the entire book. And then I put in it a lot of quotes from like Martin Luther King and Golda Meir, and they had all of this available to you, and you just picked and chose, and you created it. And it's my favorite Haggadah.
Oh, absolutely.
Because we have pictures in there from past Seders where my in-laws were still alive and things like that. And that's my favorite Haggadah.
Was that free just to download, or
No,
you paid for it?
and you paid for how many you wanted to produce.
Okay.
So I don't remember how many we made. It must have made about 20.
Wow. Wow.
I think somebody's doing it now, but it's not the same.
Okay.
It's a neat thing to do. It's a good project.
It is a great project.
I have just a suggestion for a category, and that's cookbooks.
Good point. Yeah.
And I'll give Michael, my husband, the credit for saying that, because he's recently boxed the majority of my cookbooks and dividing them between our houses. And there are a few that I treasure that go through the calendar by holiday and simcha. So I would recommend that as an additional
Excellent.
category.
Yeah.
I think in your fiction section, you missed The Red Tent by Anita Dumont.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't like that book, but if you want it in your library, you can have it. I didn't particularly like it.
Yeah. I think it's important. I'm also very close with her daughter,
Yeah.
so I'll shout out to Anita all the time.
I was also going to suggest, oh my gosh, hold on a second, I just forgot.
It'll come to you.
Judith Plasko's Standing at Sinai.
Yes.
I think I might include what I would call it, although we don't have theology, but Jewish thought, because I think more and more people are having questions about God and how do we understand
Yes.
God, and I think that would be helpful to have a section.
Yeah, and her book is really,
That was
I mean,
historically
it's now a-
classic.
what is it? It is a cornerstone of
We're childlike at our household. My favorite cookbook is the Child's Holiday Cookbook, Joe Nathan. So, so that's a children's Haggadah and a children's cookbook.
No
now
pro-
you know
that's
the level of the
fine.
Knopf household. It's very childlike.
But I'm glad you mentioned Joe Nathan, because obviously she's got cookbooks for grown-ups too.
Right.
So-
But there are also some wonderful cookbooks that you're not necessarily going to make anything from, frankly, but they're from the Holocaust. And they're recipes that were compiled from people from the Holocaust.
There is that one from from Terezin, the recipes
Yes.
from
I
Terezin.
have several, and they're really touching books.
Yeah,
They really are.
good point.
Do you think libraries, home libraries, are a thing of the past?
Yeah, I think to some degree people don't. And that's what's so interesting, because I will tell you that the print versions of JPS Tanakh and the commentaries, sales have not declined at all. There are some books that they're available online and they help you with, with searching or whatever. But I do think there are some books that people just want to, they need the printed version, or they want the printed version because they want to have it in their home. But, I have to say, in terms of the books that I read nowadays, I mean, to me, I get ebooks and they're ephemeral. There are very few books. Cookbooks and Bibles are the two that I think people, and children's books are the ones that people will continue to buy. But absolutely, I think most people aren't going to have. I mean, libraries don't even have books anymore. University libraries are, becoming computer centers, and they have, at University of Nebraska, the library has a Dunkin' Donuts, in it, and they have little pods where people can, study together with their, with their screens and stuff. So, to some degree, I think books are being presented in a format that's different. I don't know Susan and others who have young adult children, but with the exception of my rabbi daughter, I don't think they have the libraries that we had.
As they're divesting the house and splitting it up into the new two houses, before they were going to give all the books to the college and the synagogue, I was like, wait, I want to go. And so I picked a bunch of books, and it was all about the pomp and circumstance of Judaism and celebrating. So it was books about Hanukkah and Passover and celebrating in the home and like pulled like 4 or 5 Haggadahs off the wall, and I brought them to my new house. So
Yeah.
there's some of us out there.
Yeah, and I do think that there'll be that core, but the idea that people will have, I mean, when Joe and I downsized in Lincoln 3 years ago, we gave away mostly to Goodwill because other people didn't even want them. You know, once we gave over 2,000 books away, you know, because we can't keep them and nobody wants them.
Right. We were fortunate when we broke up our home in Colorado Springs that the Hillel at Colorado College had just created a center for their students. It's a small organic group growing, and they were recipients of hundreds of books, yeah. But we were happy because the synagogue said we don't want them,
Yeah,
and I couldn't bring myself to just give them to Goodwill, so I was happy.
we just kept going to Goodwill. They said bring them in separate separate carloads because you can get a donation thing for each carload. And I don't know how many times we went there, but nobody else wanted them. And it's not just Jewish books. I mean, that obviously those were not ones that I was giving away, but just books in general. So. Yeah, again, I think there's a difference between, your Jewish library and just your library in general. Anything else that you think I forgot or you would add?
I was hoping you could share a little bit more about the experience of working with an author or editing, or why some books
Okay.
are picked and not others. When you talked about all
Sure.
the Holocaust books, I was curious like why one would like rise and be like, okay, we're going to work with this. How much is the author's original work and how much is your editing and really reshaping the books? I'm just very curious.
So I can speak both from the JPS standpoint and then from a university press standpoint. From the JPS standpoint, most of the time those books were commissioned and the greatest Jewish scholars were brought together. So usually, I mean, talk about a long process. We, at Nebraska, we came back, we entered into our collaboration with JPS when they wanted to publish Outside the Bible, which is a 3-volume set of the works that weren't canonized in the Bible, like the Book of Judith, the Pseudegraphica. How do you pronounce that? Yeah. And they had like 70 scholars working on it. It was a nightmare. I mean, it's a nightmare to keep all those cats herded. At JPS, though, the commitment, and they do every year publish books that have, that rabbis or scholars come to them with, and they're more just trade books that we edit and market or whatever. But the core Jewish books that JPS does, the commentaries, I mean, they go through layers and layers and layers of rabbinic review. On the scholarly side, for instance, the University of Nebraska publishes the Comprehensive History of the Holocaust. So the author submits a book, and if it fits into what that press publishes and they're interested in it, then they'll send it out for peer review. So we'd send it out to 2 scholars to read, and based on that, the author would make revisions. Then, once we think it's where it needed to be, we would take it to our faculty board for approval. So it's a multi-year process. And, they're edited, but they're not dramatically changed once it's gone through that process. Just like a fiction book in the trade world, agents and editors will do quite a bit of work on a book and keep sending it back to the author if they think the book has potential. But in the scholarly world, it's 95% of what the author wanted. And in the JPS world, it's just gone through so many iterations and changes and updates because it's going to be something that's going to be around for a long time. It's important and it has to be right. But at the same time, at some point you gotta put a staple in it and turn it in. You have to get it marketed, and that was the problem with Deuteronomy and Jeff Teague, is he just kept revising and revising, and we actually tricked him into giving us what he had so far, and the editors at JPS read it and said, this is brilliant just as it is. He doesn't need to do any more work. And he never forgave them. He never, again, spoke to Michael Munson because he felt like he wasn't done yet. But he was done. In terms of, well, yeah, that's what I can say. You know, it's seldom in the university press world that we go out and commission a book. Usually the books would come and 99% of what's submitted is rejected, probably because 60 or 70% of them are in disciplines that we didn't publish in. But the others, you know, some just don't hold up to peer review. Some are, we would say, look, this is, you know, there's already 12 books on this subject. So lots of different reasons. It's extremely hard to get published. And in the trade world, forget it. I don't even know how. I read some of it and think, how did this get published when so much other didn't? Your point about Holocaust memoirs, even recently, The Tattoo Artist of Auschwitz, I mean, I thought that was a terrible book. If I had been the editor, I would have rejected it. So who knows? You know, who knows? And we all at every press have the one that got away. JPS rejected Jeffrey Salkin's putting God on the guest list. And they then subsequently had it published by Jewish Lights, you know, and it went on to sell thousands of copies. So, yeah. Any other comments? I know it's getting on time.
My son-in-law, who is Israeli and was in the army, he gave me this book to read, and it was very interesting, and it's called Yoni. And it's the story of Yoni Netanyahu. He is, I think, the younger brother, might be the older brother, but he's the brother of Benjamin.
JPS has a YA biography of Yoni Netanyahu.
And it's the story of the rescue in Africa.
Yeah.
Where was it? Entebbe?
Entebbe, yeah.
It's that story, and I think he was the only Jew to die in that raid, but he was the last man. And he was like in charge of the operation.
Right.
But it's a powerful story.
JPS did a young reader's book on Yoni Netanyahu. Mm-hmm. I didn't know if is this an adult version that you read? Or?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay.
I think it was an adult.
You would know.
It had very
That's
large
right. Susan
print.
has the child's version. So I think he was the older brother of.
Maybe he was the older brother.
Netanyahu,
but that was a good story. It gives you a lot of insight into the planning and the decision making and all that kind of stuff.
I think there was actually a documentary not too long ago on Entebbe.
Yep.
So.
Another interesting book is by a guy named Ari Shavit. Yeah, and he was a journalist. I guess he's still alive, I'm sure, but he was a journalist in Israel, and he wrote the book My Promised Land.
Yeah.
And so he's secular, and you know, it's an interesting story. It's an interesting perspective.
And what is that book that I know Joe's read it? I could find it on my Nook. It's alternating.
Oh, I loved it.
Starts with the.
Paragon.
Yeah.
That was the best book you've
Yeah. A Paragon, I think it was called.
It's called a paragon. It's a word that means something that has an infinite number of sides. And it was written by the gentleman who wrote the book about, no, it's like a word I never heard of before, the title.
Yeah.
That the guy who walked the Frenchman, or some man between the world trained towers. So it's an Irishman or something. It had nothing to do, and he did it. It's about an Israeli Jew and a Palestinian father, both who lost children into violence, and it also deals a lot with birds.
It's called A Paragon by Colin McCann. Yeah, and there are also, you know, Mark, there's a ton of wonderful books about current events in the Middle East, and you know, Daniel Pipes' book. I mean, there's a ton of those. So I don't mean to exclude them, but if you're talking about the kind of books that you want to build knowledge of Judaism. There's so many of them, and some are good, and some are bad, and some don't age well, and others do. Thomas Friedman's from Beirut to Jerusalem is a classic also that, it's out of date now, but worth reading. So, well, this was just meant to get you started, and appreciate especially, the editions and the idea of cookbooks, which I hadn't thought about. And I want to thank Rabbi again for asking me to do this. And in my retirement, I hope to spend a lot more time here. So, thank you.
We have a book. You're on it.